So almost everybody has had a glimpse of awakening. It's what happens when the reactivity of ego, the egoic movement, which has become the primary way of operating the human condition, comes to a standstill just for a moment or a few moments. It's what happens when the sunset catches your breath, and for a moment there's stillness in you. And then the mind comes in again and says, oh, that's beautiful. And then that moment of stillness is lost. It's what happens when you look into a baby's eyes. And for a moment, there's no baby and there's no you. And then you go, ah, that was sweet. And it's lost. It's the moment when you're picking up a cup of tea, that first sip, and there's nothing, just emptiness. And then the commentary comes in. It's the moment in between each in-breath and out-breath that usually is missed, but when we're very quiet, can be touched. We come to rest in it. That's awakening. That's awakening out of the dream of separation created by the egoic trance. The ego that is always moving on a horizontal dimension from past fear to future hope, always running away from or running towards. That's where the commentary comes in. I don't like, I do like. I don't want, I do want. For a moment, consciousness or you have woken up out of the dream of separation. But because separation, the paradigm of separation, the perspective of separation, that I am here and you are there, that there is an inner world and an outer world, and so on and so on. Because that has kept us in its grip, in its trance, it kicks in very quickly. So for a moment there is an awakening out of the dream, but unless that's consciously recognized, then it cannot really take root. So it's by consciously recognizing that momentary waking up that it starts to become more present in us, more to the forefront. Yeah, and that's what happens. That's why we have spiritual practices, are there to nurture that new perspective, that recognition, the conscious waking up, whether that be through meditation or any other spiritual practice. It's not the spiritual practice itself that is important. It's there as a support system or a reminder or a pointer. And then that awakening can happen more intensely, and there is a more conscious recognition of waking up out of the dream of separation. That's when we may have the realizations of, I am not this limited body-mind system, this personality, this definition, this label, this construct, we may have the realization that there is no world outside of us. It's all inside. It's all one. There's no ultimate separation. Everything that is experienced in you, as you. So we may have all these different realizations. And very often, most often, that fades away also. Maybe it lasts a day, or a few days, or a few weeks, or a few months. And inevitably that fades away. And then there's a disappointment, and then a trying or a scrambling to get back to that. Through more meditation, through more spiritual teachings, through more trying to get somewhere, to arrive at that state again. And that sets up all sorts of problems, all sorts of obstacles, all sorts of confusions, which then have to be worked through and recognized and unraveled. And we can certainly explore those today if that's part of your experience and the direction that today wants to go in. But before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit about what it means to really embody that awakening, what it really means to live that awakening. Because it's one thing to have the recognition of it, which is a very important and primary catalyst for living your true nature, living as your true nature, living as wholeness. It's another thing for that to be fully embodied as a day-to-day reality, as a moment-to-moment reality. So when we wake up out of the dream of separation, it's really one way of describing it is because it's a new perspective. You're seeing things not through the eyes of separation, but through the eyes of wholeness. If you like, it's like waking up in the mind. I'm not talking about just, you're waking up out of the ego mind, yeah? Out of the small mind into big mind. Yeah? But in order for that realization to be fully lived, it has to be embodied, which means that it has to come down into your living experience. And that lived experience is experienced, first of all, and these are not necessarily literal places that I'm speaking of, but more metaphorical or symbolic, but lived through the heart. Yeah? When I say lived through the heart, it has to be felt. Felt in your relationship to everything. Yeah? The heart is where we relate. Yeah? The inner world and the outer world. It's the interface. Yeah? So when we relate to each other, when we relate to our loved ones, when we relate to the world, when we relate to anything and everything that we perceive, whether it's the global situation, the social situation, the family situation, the bodily situation, everything that we relate to, every environment, inner environment and outer environment that we relate to is going to be perceived, if you like, or felt through the interface of the heart. The heart, metaphorically, symbolically, is where we withdraw, where we close down, or where we open. Yeah? We either recoil because something triggers us, something touches us, something pushes our buttons in the places where it hurts, where there is tenderness. And that's where we've learnt from the egoic paradigm to withdraw, to protect, as if it's a danger zone. Yeah? It's become a psychological danger zone. So we recoil, we turn away, we withdraw, we protect ourselves, we defend, and we attack. That's the reactivity of the ego. So we could say that the heart shuts down, and in doing that, we numb or suppress the feelings, which can be on a gross level. If we're uncomfortable with anger, then we repress anger. Or it can be on a much more subtle level. Yeah? There are ever more subtle layers to this withdrawal, this shutting down. Yeah? We may think that we feel our emotions. Well, I'm really in touch with my emotions, I feel it. But there's ever more subtle layers to that. That's where we can start to really notice and see where that withdrawal is happening, where that self-protection is happening. And we self-protect by blaming, by judging, by shaming, by labeling, this shouldn't be happening, or I shouldn't be feeling this or that. If awakening out of the dream of separation is to become a living, embodied experience, then we are called to be very honest with ourselves as to where we withdraw or close down or shut down or in any way pull away from or try to diminish the rawness of our tender spots. Because we have the choice to stay open in that. We have the choice to stay present in that. Everyone talks about presence these days. But that's what presence means. It doesn't mean just being present when you're meditating, when you're still, when you're quiet, and everything is calm, and there are no feelings. That's one aspect of presence. But to be present is to be ruthlessly, radically, unequivocally open to this. Even though the archaic mechanism of ego's reactivity is to limit that, to close, to shut down. And in that shutting down, to create a wall of defense and, most likely, an attack in that. Either an obvious attack or a more subtle attack. So it's in our relationships, in our interactions, to everything that we can start to purify the heart, so that the light of awakeness that has been open to, let's say on a mind level, can flow into your relationships to the world, your inner world and the outer world. Because awakening out of the dream of separation on the level of mind doesn't make you a perfect being. Neither does it need to. But it doesn't mean that it wipes out all conditioned reactivity. It means that if you're willing, that awakeness, that light, that wholeness, that clear seeing, which is what it is, can start to descend and filter into all those places in you that have been conditioned into building barriers, defenses, walls, armies, strategies, and so on. Because we've all been conditioned. Yeah, everybody has conditioning. That's who we are as personalities. Yeah, maybe different stories, but it's still conditioning. And then there's an even deeper layer of embodiment, as we're willing to be present even in the midst of that which hurts, of that which is raw, of that which is tender, of that which is scary, of that which we'd rather deny, of that which we'd rather run away from. As we start to find an ease with that, and it does become easier, it becomes more effortless, then it can fall into a deeper place, which we could say metaphorically is the belly. It's like a tight clench in the belly, the basic, primary, existential survival knot, the knot of self, beyond personality, beyond all the stories, the primary story, if you like, of I am all alone in existence. You could say it's the primary wound of birth. As we're born into form, as we're born into the world, out of the womb of oneness, there's an existential imprint of aloneness. When we come face to face with that, then the possibility for the light of awakeness to descend all the way, to filter all the way, is possible. So all of that, you could say, is the maturation of awakening, or the embodiment of awakening. And all of that requires your choice, your willingness, 100%. For clear seeing, for, if you like, sacrifice of ego's reactivity. And it's not that we have to overpower the ego, it's not about controlling the ego, but it's about seeing it. Being willing to see it, because being willing to see it means surrendering something that's been upheld for a lifetime or lifetimes. And there's a humility in that. There's a humility in the willingness to surrender that. And again, there's ever more subtle layers of that. And the way we see it is through our relationship with everything. It's not by sitting in isolation in a monastery or an ashram or a meditation center or even in a retreat, or even in meditation itself. That's not where the embodiment happens. That may be where the initial recognition happens. But it's in life itself, it's in the world itself, that all of this can be seen. Because the world is constantly asking you, are you willing? The world of separation that we see is a reflection of where we hold on to separation in ourselves. So there really isn't a world out there that's doing anything to you. It's all in you, inviting you. So when I offer my retreats, for instance, the focus of attention is not so much on pointing to where awakening is or where awakeness is, but rather inviting you to see what stands in the way of that. Because if you can willingly and lovingly see what stands in the way of that, then what stands in the way of that will lovingly fall away. Because it no longer serves a purpose. And then that is seen to have always been here as your true nature. But being able to see what stands in the way of that requires a high degree of self-honesty, self-exposure, and self-humility. Because what stands in the way of that is what has created the false construct of self, the false identity. It's become a habit. But it's not become a habit that you have. Become a habit that you are. And that's where the identity gets mixed up, gets confused. And the last thing we want to let go of is our sense of identity. Because who would we be without it? That is an existential question. That's the fist, the clench in the belly. It's not a mental understanding. You can't work your way through it with your mind and your thinking and your understanding and your knowledge and all that. It's pre-verbal. It's primordial. Do you actually exist? If this habit of me, of who I think I am, falls away. Whoa. Free fall. Into what? Into emptiness. Yeah, we're using words here. I have to use words. There's no other way I can convey this. But the words are a cover-up for the truest meaning of this. Hopefully these words are penetrating somewhere deeper and that you get it on a different level. Yeah? Because that's where it needs to get to if it's going to have any power of transformation. So may I say that I wrote this book. I'm not here to promote the book, but I do want to say, as it's an integral part of what I'm speaking of, I wrote this book to address some of those questions, some of those issues, some of those areas. It's not another book or teaching that points to awakening as the absolute state, as that which is beyond self, beyond this, beyond that. It is, of course, but that's not what I'm here for. There are many teachers talking about that. There are many teachings that point to that. And that is the foundation, for sure. That is the foundation. But I found that people were struggling with what happens after that. What happens when I've had the glimpse of awakening? What happens when I've really got it? When I've got the non-dual awareness or realization, even if it's for a moment. Even if you just taste it. There's been an opening. You've got it somehow. Or it's got you. But then what? Then what? Because the problems, the confusions, the stumbling around, the striving, the trying to reach it again, the trying to find it again, the jumping around from one teacher to another so that you can find it again, and all of that stems from one misperception or misunderstanding, which is this. There has to be another phase, another way, another approach, another attitude that takes it deeper, deeper into your living reality. Not further away, deeper into it. And then all the striving and looking and misunderstanding and confusion and disappointment in themselves can fall away because they're not the right questions, they're not the right attitudes, they're not the right way to go about it. So I'm addressing that. The embodiment of awakening isn't the doing the yoga practice. The embodiment of awakening isn't the just feeling your feelings. The embodiment of awakening is not the dancing and the kundalini and the this and the that. That's what many people think the embodiment of awakening is, just because it's got the word body in it. Look deeper than words. Words are lies. Words are an illusion. Words are used in many different ways. They're just pointers. The embodiment of awakening is the full living of it as a human being, fully awake and fully human. Not what you do, not the spiritual practices. Of course you need to feel your feelings. Of course you've got to come out of your head into your body. These are primary. Without that, there's no real transformation at all. That's the first step. But that's not awakening. That's not awakening out of the dream of separation. Very often that takes you further into the dream of separation. Because one is attached to the spiritual practice, one is attached to the yoga, one is attached to the, I don't know, whatever it is. The ecstatic dancing, or this, or that's all very beautiful, but that's not it. Then we become attached to that, and then a subtle spiritual ego develops. Oh, I'm progressing on the path because I've experienced ecstasy. Because I feel free when I move like this, or do this, or eat like this, or, yeah. But that's not freedom. All of these things can be supports, all of these things can be doorways, all of these things can be enjoyed, but do not mistake them for the full embodiment of awakening. It's not what you do, it's how you are. I speak about the relationship to body. I speak about the relationship to food. I speak about the relationship to another, an intimate other. But it's not about those things in themselves. It's not about having the right diet that will elevate your consciousness. It's not about having the right spiritual practice that includes physical movement and opening to expanded states of energy. It's not about having a conscious relationship even. It's not about having anything. It's about seeing ego's reactivity in all those things. When you eat out of reactivity. Our relationship to food is probably at least 90% emotional, psychological. When we have a conscious relationship, there's an unspoken contract that we're going to agree on certain principles, conscious principles. And I need you to be that person in order for me to open to love, to be vulnerable to you. It's a good start, but it's not about that ultimately. It's about having no need, no control, no strategy, no maneuvers, no begging, bullying, bartering, seducing, controlling in relationship. It's about being willing to lose the relationship. And discovering what is here amidst that loss. Discovering what can't be lost. And then there can be true relating, because you relate from your authentic, natural self, not from ego's reactivity. Ego's reactivity is in everything. You can apply that to watching the news. That's a big one. Yeah. You can apply that to anything, all relationships. So the invitation is to that. The willingness to see. Like I said, it's not about beating yourself up, it's not about telling yourself you're wrong, it's not about controlling that or even trying to change it. It's not about replacing it with anything. You don't replace ego's reactivity with some other way, some positive way, some spiritual way, some right way of behaving, some right way. No, 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 no. No replacement. Everything falls away. Let it fall away. See it. It's like a flower whose petals have come to their end. They fulfilled their purpose, and now it's time to return. To the emptiness from which they came, which is why everything dissolves back into emptiness, but it can be reborn somewhere else as new life. Then let it fall. And in the same way, that new life will appear in you. that new life will appear in you. That new life appears in you as the impulse of life's intelligence, a deeper intelligence, not the intelligence of the egoic mind, not the intelligence that you've been trained into, not the intelligence that you think you have, because you can't have intelligence. Intelligence has you. On the deeper level, intelligence moves you. And all you can do is follow that impulse, follow that nudge, follow that knowing. There's a humility in that. In that sense, you bow down to it. You are on your knees. And when you've been there long enough, you and it, unbounded intelligence, become one and the same. And even if at times, because we live in the relative world, we appear to move in and out of that realization or that deeper knowingness or that deeper abidingness, which does happen, it's very quickly recognized, and then there's a resting in it again. It becomes like a little ripple. You know, it's like the deeper you go into the ocean, the more still it becomes, and there's no movement. But you know, somewhere there, when we're pulled, perhaps the world or our world, inner world or outer world, is a little more demanding, then there's a little ripple. But because we're so close to the bottom of the ocean, it comes back to rest in that more easily, more effortlessly, more naturally.